Well, I can't really follow that get up very well, but I did wear a fancy tie. At least I did that, or it would have been really boring up here. I'm going to show you some pictures, and we're going to talk a little bit about space, and I hope to leave you a challenge. So I think India has a lot to offer and a lot more distance to go in space. But I'll start with a question. Let's see who can answer this question. How is a Ferrari like a Mars rover? Think about it. They're both best in planet. I'll show you another one in a minute. The next question is, what's the difference between a race car and a Mars rover? Well, you might say one goes slow, one goes fast, right? That would be the obvious answer. And the more technical answer is one only has one gear. Right? So it's not going to go it's not meant to go very fast. It doesn't need to shift into higher gears and go faster. It's only going to go at a very slow rate. And so this is going to interest us in sort of what's the difference between going to Mars and going to the moon. So we're going to look at this. I want to show you a scary picture. This is a scary picture. It scared a lot of people. When this picture came out from the Apollo program, it scared people into thinking, that's all we have. We're just a bubble in space. If we don't figure this space thing out, we're stuck here. Now, we did make it as far as the moon. And that, by the way, is the fastest thing on the moon. And we'll go back soon to the moon, probably in our generation. People will be there, maybe within the decade even, back on the moon again. But going to the moon was interesting and challenging and very, very, very difficult at the time, in the 60s. I mean, there was nothing like what we have today in computers and technology that they had to work with in the 60s to get humans to the moon and back. It was a miracle we had only a few mishaps rather than more. But when we're on the moon, Earth is right there. It's right across the space. Now, it takes a few days to get there, but as you all know from the Apollo 13 story, when there was a problem, they were able to rescue them and bring them home. Right? That's the near-Earth experience because it's close and it's always comforting right there in view. But see, let me show you what Earth looks like from Mars. Kind of what Mars looks like from Earth, right? It would be no surprise. Earth is not nearby. Earth is 8-9 months away. An impossible trip on the spur of the moment for an accident. It's a completely different game. So when you go to Mars, there's no water, there's no atmosphere, there's nothing going on there. There's very little light. Actually, it's very difficult to even get power on the solar arrays for running the rovers. In other words, even though the moon is exciting and we're so happy we went there, we think that's really big of us humans to actually get to the moon. Mars is a completely different game. Not much of what we did to go to the moon actually applies to go to Mars, other than it's a rocket and it's a spaceship. Yeah, right, I got that. But all the other parameters are completely different. It's an 8-month, 9-month journey. It was a few days to get to the moon. We spent a few hours on the moon. You'll spend months or years on Mars to return. You can't take everything with you in your suitcase. You can figure out how to provide for yourself on the way. It's a completely different kind of trip. The radiation is another whole story. We don't know how you're going to survive radiation for 8 months. Astronauts today, except for the ones who went to the moon, all live in the protective shield of the Earth's magnetic sphere, which protects most of the radiation from the astronauts. So how are we going to play this game if it's very different? So you can reach Mars, and you can send a rover, and you can poke around and look at rocks and do things. But what are we going to do if we actually want to go there? It's going to be a very, very different game. And so I wanted to just draw this comparison between how similar it looks from a distance, but yet it's very, very different when you get up to it. The trip to the moon and the trip to Mars. Because this is what I believe India's space tech startup industry is facing today. So I want to show you some models, talk about a few examples, and see what we can do to help. Because I think it's up to us to help this space sector develop. I believe India needs its space sector. I believe it wants its space sector. I believe it can do it. But it needs some obstacles and things moved and some changes made. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. Here's a model of how our space startups are stuck in what I call Rover Gear. Moving at 1 gear, 1 mile an hour, trying to get ahead. If you look in the middle here, the model sort of shows what's wrong and why they're stuck. We'll blow it up. So look at, you can see what's happening. Space projects, space startups, require a fair amount of capital. Okay, you can't sit in your garage with a computer and build an app and go to Mars or go to space, even low Earth orbit, right? You need some serious amount of capital. Now, if you're Elon Musk, you can do whatever you want. And there are a few entrepreneurs like that, but that's not what's driving the industry here. Although there's no lack of money in India. We all know that. There was good things to do with it and opportunities were there, money would come. Money is not a problem in India today. But you need good amount of capital, more than most people have in their pocket or their savings book, to start a space tech company. Unfortunately, investors want to see potential customers before they give you, a couple $1 million, $5, $10, $15 million. They want to see that you actually have customers. Problem with customers is they want to know that you have a product that works, a product that's actually flown in space 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Elon Musk did that. He built rockets, he launched them, some of them blew up. He finally launched enough that succeeded that he could then go to NASA or another commercial company and say, I have a proven rocket, you can use it. Now he spent his own billions to do that. But we don't even have to build rockets, just to build satellites, even small satellites, $1 million, $5 million, $100 million. Who's going to build these if you're stuck in this circle and you can't get out? So this was the problem that I addressed with Indian startups that I've talked to. And the issue is, what's actually holding the Indian space sector back if we were going to try to make it move forward as best we can, assuming we agree that we need it? Because as I said, there's lots of money, there's lots of technology, there's lots of knowledge and skills. How do I know that? Because NASA's hiring him. One of the best engineers I've ever met in India, brilliant person, probably be in one of these forums in the next few years, from Mumbai, just took a job. He wrote me, he was so excited. I got a job. Professor Rogers, I'm so excited, I got a job. Where? California, with a space outfit. He'll do fine, but we need those people. He doesn't dislike India. He's just market forces. He's going where the best opportunities are, and others are like him. We need to change that. The talent is here, lots of skill, and there's lots of interest. Indian people are fascinated with space, right? I mean, there's no lack of interest, and there's lots of infrastructure. India is already a spacefaring nation. ISRO's been around for 50, 60 years, or however, and it's launched many rockets, has a long, successful record, and there's a lot of legacy there. So what do we need to do? Well, I think there's a problem with the way things are set up. So forgive me if I just take a moment to give you my personal opinion after spending I was in India in 1971. So they didn't say it in my resume, but I actually went to school here. So I've been in India for a long time and coming back and forth. So I consider myself, partly Indian. So forgive me if I speak that way. I hope you'll bear with me. But this is what I see. When I look at the situation, it looks like this. The government's on top, but running the show. ISRO is their right hand, look at it from the side, and industry is their left hand. So they tell ISRO what to do, ISRO works with industry, they get things done, and it's a nice tight little circle. And there's a big ceiling, or floor, or glass ceiling, whatever you want to call it, barrier. And down below are academics, science institutions, startups, and customers, meaning non-ISRO customers. And they're getting what? The crumbs that fall through, if anything, or the pieces that are spare, extra pieces. You can play around here. You can play with this small piece of component, or you can build parts for us. This relegates the whole sector to being just a supplier, a second tier supplier. But India has the opportunity to become a first-rate space nation. Not every nation has that. In fact, there's very few that have building, facilitating, launching, launch capability, and the experience to actually figure out how to do it. So what needs to change in this model? And you've heard things already from a number of speakers about the need to foment an entrepreneurial market and startups, and the government needs to make policies and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to give you specific government policies that they should or should not do, just what it should look like. Because this techade that we talked about with NASSCOM was not dissimilar to what President Kennedy gave the US in 1961. He said, I want you to go to the moon and come back safely within this decade. So this is not an unheard of kind of challenge. And we're early in the decade. It's only been a couple of years. And there's a lot going already on. If we just take some time and plan carefully, I think in the terms of the decade time frame is what I'm trying to say, these changes can come about. Will they happen tomorrow? Probably not. Not that fast. But if we don't work on them, they'll never happen. And in 10 years, we'll look just like we look today, or worse. So what do I think needs to happen? This needs to switch. So notice the other things didn't switch. Basically, the only thing that switched was the government needs to support the industry. And I'm not saying they don't, but this is the mentality that needs to be shifted. How do we support the industry where we don't necessarily make all the calls or all the choices? And I'll give you a clue that needs to happen to allow that to happen. Startups become the sort of point, the driving point, because that's where the innovation, the real innovation happens, and the cutting edge, because they can take the chances. They can build 10 startup companies and 9 of them fail, and one of them actually comes up with a genius idea for doing something on Mars. That's okay. Then the industry needs to get involved with them. They need to be partners with them and support them, not in competition or keeping them out of the market or just giving them crumbs. Because see, what happens is, when there's a healthy space startup tech industry, ideas get created, and the legacy players, I mean, you know, the HALs, the L&Ts, you know, who Tatas, all these people who do all the big contract building, Boeings, all those folks, they get smart by buying these small companies. That's the way it works. But if you don't expect that, you won't do that. I don't think many space startup entrepreneurs that I've talked to in India, a number of companies I visited with, would be interested in being acquired by one of these Indian legacy technology big companies, because they would be, frankly, they would just die. They'd be shoved in a closet somewhere because there's just no way to fit them in. The models don't match. That's what I mean by industry needs to take a different role. I'll talk a little more about that in a second. Because the way we've done things in the past, which was a nice, tidy little circle, right, between the government, Israel, and industry, and they just kind of worked around together, and that worked for an era of India's history, isn't going to get you to Mars, where things are completely different, if you get the analogy between the moon and Mars. So what is actually missing here? And you've heard this already from a number of speakers as well. It's not a new idea. R&D. India's paltry in the amount of money we spend on R&D. Let me give you a simple example. You've all seen Pixar cartoons. Where did that technology come from? An innovator hired a couple of scientists. One of them was Ed Catmull, who was doing graduate research work funded by the government on digitization and animation. The government didn't have an agenda for animation. They were just funding investigative research to find out what would be useful. I'm sure they got something down the road. He learned and did that. A person hired him as a scientist and programmer and designer, and he figured out how to do that. And later they went on to build Pixar, which got acquired by Disney, technically, but we all know Pixar really took over Disney. They took over all the animation of Disney. The old Disney part was cleaned out. And that's what I mean. That's scary. And it was scary. Disney resisted actually bringing in Pixar because they knew they would overwhelm them. They were the new. Disney inside people were the old. And yet Disney would never have moved on to the next level if they had just maintained what worked before. We'll do what works again. Somebody else would have had Pixar. And this is what I mean by the industry in India needs to take a different approach and say, these startups who are getting these new ideas aren't challenging us and making us look bad. They are our future. We should be partnering with them. We should be encouraging them. We should be funding them. And when they're ready, We should be making ways to bring them into our fold and bring them into the ecosystem that we're involved in with ISRO and the large players, and find a place for what they're doing so others will see that's a good roadmap. You could build a company, take it to 50, 100, 200 million in 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and you could be bought, and you could go do it again. Because the entrepreneurs don't have to worry about, oh, my one idea is gone. Get another one. Go build another company. Sell it to another person. This is how the market works. I mean, there are a few that go become unicorns and become IPOs. And all. We understand that, the holy grail. This picture, what I thought of when I saw this picture, I said, what do I want to leave them to think about with this? It's like an umbrella. There's a song we have in the old days, pennies from heaven. Pennies from heaven, it's raining pennies from heaven. And if it's raining pennies from heaven, make sure you have your umbrella upside down, right? If you want to catch the pennies. If you have it right side up, you don't get anything. And the early picture, which I showed you, is kind of an upside down umbrella. Everything, right side up, everything falls off. Like, we don't want that to get us wet. We need to get wet. Turn your umbrella upside down and collect what's coming. That's my message to industry. And the government will need to find ways to support that and bring on academics, the scientists, and getting them involved. We know that the R&D and the science are two things that India is not poor at in terms of doing. We just need to invest in it. And we need to create the pipeline that says that leads to places so people will pursue it. Our best scientists shouldn't say, my only future is to go somewhere else. It should be here. In fact, I'll show you what I think success looks like in this regard in just a minute. But I want to share a few ideas what this looks like, give you some details as I thought about it. So the future Indian space ecosystem. A strong research and development market driven by government policy. Even Elon Musk did research projects, in other words, prototype projects funded by NASA. Even though he had a lot of money, he was still part of the competition and was able to do that. Broad array of startups, partnerships with innovation in mind. And the goal is to be innovative, not to just capture an existing piece of a market share and sit on it. How do we change it? How do we make the market go forward? And this idea of a strong exit market. Something happened in the slide. Strong exit market for startup investors. So there's a future for people to start companies and see where they might want to go. So what's going to be required to happen? I don't know, something happened to the slides. Oh, there they are. So we have to let go of what's been working in the past and be able to go forward to what we need to do. One of the things I think is a big pill to swallow, so hear me, eventually, we have a decade, NASA was successful for one particular reason, in that it was early on, 1958, separated from the defense industry. And it's not 100%. There's obviously, they're all Americans. They share intelligence and information. But they're separated as institutions and agencies. And this created a much bigger stakeholder group for the civilian exploration and science and technology. And that has fueled a lot of it. I think India needs to think seriously about doing it. I know it's hard. That'd be a really hard one. But we need to think about doing that. We have to be competitive in global markets. Winning big contracts in India is one thing, but we know all the people. They know us. When are we going to win big contracts in other countries? That takes some grooming of our legacy players, and it's going to take some involvement and partnership with these startups to give us that edge so we don't look old and maybe tired and sleepy. We need to invest in academic research where the scientists are being grown. That means money to invest in ideas when we're not sure what they're going to come up with. And frankly, just look at us. And this parade of people who've been on these stages for the last 2 days. Most of them look a lot more like me than the people that are running startups. There's too much gray hair, too many of us trying to run everything. These guys have the idea. Do you know the engineers who did the Apollo program in the 1960s? When they launched the Apollo 11 and went to the moon, the average engineer working in that launch room was 26 years old. The average. You can do it, but we need to let them go. Welcoming minds, exploring, and we need to be willing to explore boldly, which India is already doing with Mangalyaan, Chandrayaan, and Gaganyaan. They're already doing things. Here's what I would call symptoms of success. How do we know we're actually doing anything? Because these are big issues, big questions. They may say, well, how do we know that? Here's a couple of, think about this one. Foreign students are competing for Indian space prizes instead of Indians' brightest vying for NASA competitions. I have students write me, oh, I won a prize with the NASA competition. I made a rover, I made a robot, I did this, I did some space prize. Oh, where's that? Oh, in the US or Europe or somewhere. India's not short of money. There's people who've made lots of money who would be willing to do things for India to do that. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't they lining up to get the India Space Prize? Here's another one. Foreign firms competing to acquire Indian space technology firms. And Indian space startups attracting the best talent, not only from India's institutions like ISB, IIM, all those others, ITs, but even foreign institutions. Why should the best from India go to, why don't some of the best from there come here? Because we have created the opportunity. We can do it. We just need to realign and get ourselves a little bit better focused. I know those are some big things I put up on the chart that are not going to happen instantly. But if we don't sort of generate some motion in the right directions, things will just keep going on. And things have changed. InSpace has come about, a great organization. They need some life. They need some pizzazz. They probably need some young people in their organization. It's mostly retired people and people like me, my age. We're okay, we're not bad, but we don't have the fire in the belly that these young people have. You saw those guys the other day on the stage. Weren't they amazing? I mean, there's people like that doing these space startups at Dhruva Space in Hyderabad and Pixel and Bangalore. I've talked to these guys. They're amazing. And they have the same kind of passion and desire. Why do I think this is going to happen? I mean, I don't think this is just a bunch of hot air, although I'm just speaking words. No one's asking me, what we should actually do. I'll tell you why I think it's going to happen. Because I said I've been in India a long time. I think India has a lot going for it. It has the money, the technology, the knowledge, the skills, the people. We've heard this over and over again. The IT is there to make it happen. I think India is poised to do this and in the right place because of this. In just over a generation, India figured out how to take a collection of empire states and make a nation. It's really an amazing accomplishment. If you look at the other places around the world, we've made a nation out of a whole collection of states and peoples and languages. In just over about 30 years, India has figured out how to take a state-run economy and make a capital economy for trillions and trillions of dollars and increase in livelihood. In a few decades, India built an IT global industry from a call center. They were just a call center and built billions of an IT industry around the world. People would have laughed. They're like, your call center is going to become a global IT and it's going to be running right. India's figured out with UPI and Aadhaar and all this, how to construct a digital economy from an agrarian base where people weren't even literate, let alone banked and digitized. But India's done it. And other people want to know how. It's time for India to take a bigger role and take a lead in space technology and wayfaring space. Thank you.
For more interesting content, like, comment and subscribe to our NASSCOM YouTube channel.